The expenditure method is one of the primary approaches used to calculate a country's gross domestic product, GDP. GDP measures the total economic output of a country over a specific period. The expenditure method calculates GDP by summing up all spending on final goods and services within an economy during a given time frame. It is based on the idea that all economic activity results in expenditures, and these expenditures represent the value of goods and services produced. Intuitive explanation of the expenditure method. The expenditure method is rooted in the circular flow of income in an economy. In this model, households spend money on goods and services, consumption. Firms invest in capital goods, investment. The government spends on public goods and services, government spending. Foreigners buy domestically produced goods, exports, and domestic residents buy foreign goods, imports. The expenditure method adds up all these spending components to measure the total economic activity in an economy. Components of GDP. Using the expenditure method, the expenditure method breaks down GDP into four main components. 1. Consumption, C. Spending by households on goods and services, e.g., food, clothing, healthcare, education. This is the largest component of GDP in most economies. 2. Investment, I. Spending by businesses on capital goods, e.g., machinery, buildings, infrastructure, and changes in inventories. Also includes spending on residential construction. 3. Government spending, G. Spending by the government on public goods and services, e.g., defense, education, infrastructure. Excludes transfer payments, e.g., pensions, unemployment benefits, because they do not represent spending on goods and services. 4. Net exports, NX, exports, X minus imports, M. Exports represent spending by foreigners on domestically produced goods, while imports represent spending by domestic residents on foreign goods. The formula for GDP using the expenditure method is: example, calculating GDP. Using the expenditure method, suppose we have the following data for an economy in a given year, in billions of dollars. Consumption, C. $500. Investment, I. $200. Government spending, G. $300. Exports, X. $100. Imports, M. $150. Using the expenditure method, so the GDP of the economy is $950 billion. Intuitive explanation of each component. 1. Consumption, C. Represents the spending by households on goods and services. Example, a family buys groceries, pays for healthcare, and purchases a new car. 2. Investment, I. Represents spending by businesses on capital goods and changes in inventories. Example, a company builds a new factory or buys new machinery. 3. Government spending, G. Represents spending by the government on public goods and services. Example, the government builds a new highway or funds a public school. 4. Net exports, NX. Represents the difference between exports and imports. Example, if a country exports $100 billion worth of goods and imports $150 billion worth of goods, net exports are $50 billion, a trade deficit. Why use the expenditure method? 1. Comprehensive measurement. The expenditure method captures all spending in the economy, ensuring that no economic activity is left out. 2. Policy implications. By breaking down GDP into its components, policymakers can identify which sectors are driving economic growth and which need support. 3. International comparisons. The expenditure method is widely used across countries, making it easier to compare economic performance globally. Key points to remember. 1. Final goods and services. The expenditure method only counts spending on final goods and services, goods that are not used as inputs in the production of other goods. This avoids double counting. 2. Exclusions. Transfer payments, e.g., pensions, unemployment benefits, are excluded because they do not represent spending on goods and services. Intermediate goods, e.g., raw materials used in production, are excluded to avoid double counting. 3. Net exports. Net exports can be positive, trade surplus, or negative, trade deficit, depending on whether a country exports more than it imports or vice versa. Intuitive summary. The expenditure method calculates GDP by adding up all spending on final goods and services in an economy. It captures the contributions of households, consumption, businesses, investment, the government spending, and the rest of the world, net exports. By focusing on spending, the expenditure method provides a comprehensive measure of economic activity and helps policymakers understand the drivers of economic growth. For example, if a country's GDP is $950 billion, this means that the total spending on final goods and services in the economy during the year was $950 billion. This spending reflects the value of all economic activity, from household consumption to business investment and government spending, adjusted for trade with other countries.